Welcome to anglos.co.il. Today in the studio, we welcome Jay Hait from Hait Family Law. Jay, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate your time in offering your expert advice. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about marriage in Israel, but to start off with, maybe give us a little bit about your background, your legal background here in Israel.
Okay, so I've been an attorney since '97. I've been practicing law in Israel since 2009, and my practice in Israel focuses solely on family law, and that's really a switch from what I was doing in the States, which was corporate and securities law.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I went through a really bad divorce, and I realized how awkward and messed up the Israeli system is because of the combination of Western laws in the family court and halakha being applied in the rabbinic court and to a certain extent in the family court. And I said, wait, A, I can do it better, and B, I can, at the very least, help people navigate the system better.
To start off with, can you maybe just explain something that you touched on? What are the differences between getting married in Israel versus, for example, as an Anglo from our experience elsewhere, South Africa, the US, the UK?
Sure. Look, outside of Israel and most of the Anglo countries, marriage is a civil thing. In other words, yes, you get married with a rabbi or with a priest, but the marriage itself is a civil union, okay? It's something that's made, and therefore, anybody can get married to anybody else.
Right.
Okay? Here in Israel, since the marriage of anybody goes in accordance with their personal religious standing.
Okay.
And what it means is that Jews have to get married to each other in the rabbinic court. People who are Catholic have to get married in the Catholic system. People who are Druze or who are Muslims get married in their systems, okay? And in the Sharia. And what happens is that people who are either of different religions can't get married. People whose religion isn't recognized, like there are about 400,000 people from the former Soviet Union who are ethnically Jewish but not halachically Jewish. They can't get married in Israel. People who are pisulei chitun or forbidden to be married aren't able to get married to each other, like a Cohen and a divorcee. And people of same-sex marriages aren't able to get married to each other. Just anybody who doesn't fall into the precepts of one of the 8 recognized religions can't get married in Israel.
Okay, so for example, unlike in another Anglo country where you get married sort of civilly and it's registered at a government office, and then the ceremony is kind of a ritual that you can do anywhere, but the marriage is registered here. It's actually that marriage is actually registered through the religious authority.
Right. It goes through the religious authority, and then it gets registered. And that's why, if people are in any of these situations, they can go outside of Israel and get married, and then they can come back and register it with Misrat HaPanim, the Interior Ministry, as married.
So, for example, if I made Aliyah as a married person, they would obviously recognize that marriage. And even if I lived here as an Israeli citizen or an Oleh who had come here, if I'm not in one of those groups, I can leave the country, go somewhere else, get married, and they will recognize it here.
Yes, if on the administrative level. In other words, in the rabbinical courts, it's not recognized. In the other religious courts, it's not recognized. But in terms of the Israeli government and the Ministry of the Interior, it's recognized.
So legally, it would legally be recognized as a marriage for all intents and purposes.
Correct.
Gotcha. Getting back to marriage, so you've touched on getting married within the different religious faiths. Can you just explain briefly what is the process if I want to get married? What is the process that I have to follow here in Israel?
You would go into the rabbinic court, and you would tell them that you want to open up a marriage file. But what I recommend to everybody, and yes, I'm biased, is called Sohar. Sohar is an organization of Orthodox rabbis, and they try to make the system more friendly.
Okay.
In other words, within the frameworks of halacha, and they really tell people exactly what they should be doing, A, B, C, and then I find that the people that I know who have gotten married through Tzohar tend to be, even when they're secular Israelis, much less hostile towards the concept. In other words, I've seen people who say, man, we don't want this rabbi coming in. Oh, man, we don't want to have to go through Chatan and Kala classes.
Yes.
We've been living together for 8 years. What the heck? And I find the people that have gone through Tzohar is, more understanding and makes it more, mungash, appealable to people.
Got you. So for example, in the Jewish community, whether you're religious, secular, you would still have to go through the same process, which may be a little foreign to a secular person, not understanding all the halakha, like you said, around it, but they would still have to follow those processes.
Correct. Again, the thing that I've found most people incredibly offended at are Kala classes, where they've said, "Whoa, what are they making me go and learn about, etc." And also people who have said, "Oh, they've gotten insulted about what I'm going to be forced to go to the mikveh or things like that." So,
and how long is that process? Is there a certain amount of time that they have to attend those classes, or there's a certain amount of within that process before they can actually get married?
That I can't tell you. I know that it differs from place to place, but it's sort of like I always tell people, one of the issues that we in general coming from Western countries have with Israel is that there's not a strict set of nahalim. In other words, and I'll give you the classic example, is I had someone who failed their driving test 2 times, and they tried just to register their U.S. license in Jerusalem where they live. And they weren't able to. And I said, listen, go to Netanya. I said, why Netanya? I said, because in Netanya, I've heard it's easier.
Yes.
She went to Netanya, and boom, it went right through. And she calls and she says, but why? And I said, because there's not one standard set of nahalim in each office. The same thing with the rabbinic courts.
Right. Okay, got you. So now that we've touched on it and getting married within the different groups. Let's say, for example, somebody didn't want to go that route. Are there other options for marriage that have a legal standing here that people can go through to have the legal standing of being married, or that is the only route is to do it through, if you're Jewish, through the rabbinical court, or if you're a Muslim, to do it through those channels?
That is correct. Within Israel, in other words, you can always leave Israel. That's why there's such a dehira, how do you say, horde of people going to Cyprus to get married. So
that's quite common?
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that I just want to touch about is in other countries we have what's called common law marriage.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. So maybe just explain. So
in Israel we don't have common law marriage, but we have concept called yaduim b'tzibur, known in public. And that is, if people form a joint household and they haven't gotten married, then they are known in public, and there are rights that they have acquired for themselves that are very similar to the rights of married couples. The issue is that most of the time the determination of known in public, of yaduim b'tzibur, is done at the end of a marriage or at the termination of somebody's life when someone passes away. That sounded horrible, right? The termination of somebody's life. But because then what happens is one person says, oh, we had a joint household, I'm supposed to get half of the assets. And the other one says, well, we don't have children, we weren't really known in public. And it becomes a legal fight after the fact. So there are a couple of organizations that have tried to take care of this by issuing things like what's called a tudat zugiyut, a certificate of coupleness. One of the big ones, Mishpacha Chadasha, recently I read is going to be losing their amuta status. But their concept was, hey, you get this and you're declaring beforehand that, hey, we are a couple. Now the other thing that couples can do to ensure that this status will be recognized is to do a financial agreement.
Okay.
In other words, and by the way, because of court rulings, I always used to tell my kids are all already after Army,
yes.
but when they were in the Army already, I said, listen, if you're going to be shacking up with somebody, you should get an agreement in place now. And they said, Abba, what are you talking about? Also, in a religious way, shacking up together. But I said, listen, the court rulings are going that they're accepting people as Yeduim B'tzibur for less and less time.
Yes.
And I was speaking with one of the judges, and he said to me one time, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually it hits 6 months or a year, and they'll recognize the status. And that just said to me, whoa, so it hasn't been 6 months or a year yet.
Right.
But the point is, since there's no legislation, and since, a judge, depending on how he's feeling one day, has incredibly large leeway.
So it's quite subjective.
Absolutely.
There's not very strict guidelines.
Well, there's a general guideline that if all the bills are coming together, they have a joint bank account, etc.
Yes.
Then it's pretty clear. But it's the cases that aren't cut and dry that you got to say, wait a second, maybe we should be getting into some type of agreement. Especially, what I've noticed a lot is that people in Perek Bet, how do you say, the second chapter of their lives. In other words, they have children, they raise their children, they get divorced, or the children are still little, then they get divorced, and they have a new love interest. A lot of times they don't get married.
Yes.
And then I always tell people, listen, if you're going into that type of situation, do a monetary agreement, because you don't know how messy it can get if you try to break apart the second situation.
Right, so technically you can't really get married, but you can have an agreement in place that governs, any kind of, what would happen in financial relationship in the terms of separation or death of a party or something like that.
Although the death itself is only taken care of in the will, but you can make a general framework of how your relationship is going to be.
Gotcha, that's great to know. So I know it's very topical at the moment with the whole issue of marriage. So maybe we can just talk about a specific case. We recently saw the Olympic gold medalist, I hope I don't kill his name, Artem Dolgopiat, I think is his name, who recently won a gold medal, and there was a whole issue about whether he could or couldn't get married in Israel. Can you just explain briefly what is the exact complication there, and is there any way for him to resolve it other than going to Cyprus and getting married?
The complication is that he is not halachically Jewish. He's ethnically Jewish.
Gotcha.
In other words, his father is Jewish, but his mother is not Jewish. And since he is not halachically Jewish, and in point of fact, if I understand correctly, he's of no religion, he can't marry somebody here, especially not his girlfriend, who, as I understand, is Jewish.
Got you.
So that's the problem. And right now, the only thing that he can do is either leave the country and get married and then register it, or decide to live together as a non-married couple, as you do in B'tzibur, like we spoke about.
Are there any moves afoot? Is the status quo going to remain, or are there any moves afoot to find other ways to manage this issue, or do you just foresee that it remains like this for some time to come?
No, I believe, I hope. Look, in my opinion, it's a very immoral situation. In other words, to have a country say that a high percentage, right, if we look at the number of same-sex unions, look at the number of people who, the 400,000 people from the former Soviet Union who have no religion, we look at all these things, so you're looking at least 10, maybe 15 or 20% of the people who can't get married. And I think that it's immoral for a modern state to say that two people who want to form a family don't have a legal capability to do so. That being said, since Yossi Beilin, I don't know if you know who he is.
I'm not familiar.
A politician from years ago, they had talked about making some type of alternate system.
Okay.
And the problem, should I be talking about the problem? I mean, why they don't do it? I mean, the problem is divorce. The problem isn't marriage.
Yes.
The problem is that if people get divorced in a non-halachic manner,
right,
future children will be mamzerim.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay? And so they've said, we're just not touching it.
Yes.
Because
it's a very complicated issue.
Right, okay. So right now, I can tell you personally, knowing from some of the politicians that I know, that yes, there are discussions about it, about making an alternate path. Will it happen? I don't know. Do I hope it happens? I do. And, what's very important for me as someone who believes in the halachic system
yes.
is that they do it in such a manner that it won't lead to the split of the nation. In other words, one of the most beautiful things I find in Israel is that you have lots of couples where someone's religious and someone's not religious, and they can get married and they can form a family. And usually the family goes either more one way or more the other,
right.
But it's not like, well, they just can't get married.
Right.
Whereas if they did the civil marriages in such a manner that there was civil divorce, in my opinion, there would be a total split in the nation. And I think that the real important factor is whatever system they do make, and as I said, I think it's immoral not to have some type of system, but to make sure that the system ensures that there is not a halachic problem so that people can continue to fall in love and marry whoever they want to.
That's great. That sounds great. Maybe one more question just around marriage and something that we see in other countries. The concept of like prenuptial contracts and married in community of property and out of in community of property, is there such a concept here? Can you sign prenuptial agreements here in Israel?
So first of all, you can, and I advise to everybody to do so.
Okay.
I mean, the only cases I don't advise people to do so is when you have two young people getting married where nobody has assets and nobody's expecting to get assets or be given assets, right. Then okay. Everybody else, I think it's very important to have a prenuptial agreement, even if they can decide, hey, we're going to split everything equally, and that's great.
Yes.
Okay, but the point is, people don't talk about these things.
Right.
People run into getting married without really talking about these issues, and I think that just by doing a prenuptial agreement, you talk about these issues, and I think it leads to greater stability within the relationship if everybody knows what to expect.
Great. It's almost like people are like, we're just getting married and you want us to deal with the divorce.
I get that all the time. I get that all the time, and my response is, I think that's the opposite. Everyone says it's so unromantic, so I always tell them two things. One, look at your ketuvah, okay? If you look at the ketuvah and have someone translate the Aramaic for you,
right.
It's a contract, number one.
Yes.
But number two is I think it's one of the most romantic things in the world. Okay. I think that someone who's willing to come and say, listen, you're so important to me, my future relationship is so important to you that even though we just want to get into bed with each other, I want to make sure that we talk about things so that we can build a stable relationship.
Yes.
In my opinion, that's an incredibly romantic thing to do.
Maybe before we finish off, is there anything that we haven't spoken about or something that comes to mind, a piece of advice that you've seen that you can maybe give us before we go?
Yes, there's something that we didn't touch on, which is ancillary to a prenuptial agreement.
Okay.
In Israel, there is a problem of aginut, of chained wives and chained husbands, but for husbands it's less of a problem.
Okay.
And one of the things that we recommend that people do is that they enter into what is called a haskem kavod hadadi, a mutual respect agreement.
Okay.
And basically that agreement is a tool to attempt to prevent someone from becoming chained. In other words, the way that it works, it says, hey, in the event that one of us wants to get divorced and we do the proper things that the agreement says we have to do,
yes.
If the other side's not willing to get divorced, then there's going to be a monetary, knas? Penalty that they'll be paying. Okay, now, it's done within the framework of halacha.
Yes.
There are some rabbis who have problems with it.
Okay.
There are some legal theorists like Susan White, who I incredibly respect, who points out the problems in that agreement, and I agree, there may be problems. On the other hand, I think that people are better off doing it at the end of the day and trying to avoid that horrible situation where someone is being held captive in a marriage.
Great. Jay, thank you so much for making the time to come in, speaking to us and sharing your expertise and experience. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching.
And thank you for having me.